While Zimbabwe's politicians are fighting over who gets to stay in power until 2030, a completely different number just landed on the table. 2.7 billion US dollars. That is what Zimbabwe owes. That is the wall standing between this country and the roads it cannot build, the schools it cannot fund, and the hospitals it cannot properly equip. And that wall just got $200 million higher overnight. The African Development Bank has just revised Zimbabwe's debt clearance figure upward. The government had been telling the world it needed 2.5 billion US dollars to clear its arrears and unlock access to affordable international loans. The AFDB has looked at the full picture, added the European Investment Bank to the list of creditors that must be paid first, and arrived at a different number, 2.7 billion, 200 million more than Zimbabwe was prepared for. And the consequences of not paying are consequences that every ordinary Zimbabwean is already living. Let us break this down simply, because this story sounds like economics, but what it actually is a human story about services, about infrastructure, about the daily lives of people who have been waiting for a functioning country for far too long. Zimbabwe owes money, old money, debts that have been building for years, owed to some of the most powerful international financial institutions on the planet, the World Bank, 1.61 billion US dollars. The African Development Bank, 759 million US dollars, and now added to the list, the European Investment Bank, 441 million US dollars. That is what Zimbabwe owes these three institutions alone. Money borrowed in the past, not paid back, sitting there, accumulating, blocking the future. Because here is how international development finance works. When you owe money to the World Bank and the AFDB and the EIB, and you have not paid it back, those institutions do not give you more money. They cannot. Their own rules, their mandates, their accountability to their shareholders and member states prevent them from throwing good money after bad. So Zimbabwe cannot access new World Bank loans, cannot access new AFDB loans, cannot access the kind of long-term low-interest financing that governments use to build highways, construct hospitals, expand electricity grids, upgrade water systems, and invest in the foundations of a functioning economy. Not until the old debts are cleared first. That is the woe. 2.7 billion US dollars of woe standing between Zimbabwe and its development future. Earlier this year, Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube was actively seeking 2.5 billion from countries including the United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan. The plan was to use that bridge financing, essentially a loan, to pay off other loans, to clear the arrears, restore Zimbabwe's standing with international lenders, and unlock access to the affordable long-term financing the country desperately needs. It was already an enormous ask. 2.5 billion is not a number that friendly governments produce quickly or easily. It requires political will, diplomatic relationships, economic reform commitments, and time. And now, the AFDB has added 200 million more to that ask because the European Investment Bank was not in the original calculation and the EIB must be paid. Its $441 million of arrears must be settled before Zimbabwe can be considered clear. The target has moved, and it moved in the wrong direction. Now, here is the number that should make every Zimbabwean stop scrolling and start paying very close attention. Zimbabwe's total public debt stands at 21.53 billion US dollars. But the real figure, when you include central bank liabilities that do not always appear in the headline number, is estimated at 23.35 billion, $23 billion. In a country whose GDP, the total value of everything the economy produces in a year, is a fraction of that figure. And the AFDB is warning that Zimbabwe faces an annual financing gap of 3.7 billion US dollars every year until 2030 just to meet its basic development goals. Every single year, 3.7 billion short. Now, place that number next to the wedding, the $20 million wedding that happened while Zimbabweans watched in fury the cash gifts and luxury vehicles and pregnant cattle gifted among a circle of politically connected individuals while the country's hospitals ran without medicine. 3.7 billion annual financing gap, $20 million wedding. Same Zimbabwe, same week, same government. The AFDB itself said it plainly. This debt overhang limits development spending and social service delivery. Development spending, social service delivery. Those are the roads not built, the clinics not stocked, the teachers not paid, the school desks not replaced, the water pipes not fixed, the electricity grid not upgraded. Every single service that ordinary Zimbabweans interact with every day is being limited by a debt that the AFDB is now saying is $2.7 billion and growing. The timing of this announcement is deeply uncomfortable for the Zimbabwean government because the government is simultaneously pushing CAB 3, the constitutional amendment, to extend presidential terms and restructure how Zimbabwe's leader is chosen while the country's international financial standing is deteriorating. The AFDB's conditions for debt relief are clear and public. Zimbabwe must carry out economic reforms overseen by the IMF. It must continue compensating former farm owners. It must improve governance. That word sits in the middle of this debt crisis like an accusation. Because international lenders and development institutions do not separate economic reform from political reform. They do not look at a country restructuring its constitution to extend presidential terms, removing direct elections from citizens, transferring voter registration to a government office, and conclude that governance is improving. They look at those things and they wait. And while they wait, Zimbabwe cannot access the financing it needs. The United States government adds another layer of complexity through ZIDERA, the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act of 2001, which restricts American support for Zimbabwe's access to international credit. Zimbabwe is trying to engage Washington on this legislation. But engaging Washington on democracy-linked sanctions while simultaneously pushing through constitutional amendments that critics call undemocratic is a conversation with a very difficult internal contradiction. You cannot convincingly tell America you are becoming more democratic, while your own vice president is calling party insiders toxic, while your own nephew is being expelled for opposing your extension of power, while you are removing the secret ballot from parliamentary votes on your own constitutional amendment. The international community is not watching Zimbabwe with one eye. They are watching with both. And what they are seeing is a country whose debt is growing, whose governance trajectory is unclear, and whose political energy is consumed by a succession war and a constitutional battle, while the development clock keeps ticking.